Hey guys, we are so excited to meet together again and share this unbelievably important topic. So if you're watching this, thank you, and I want to emphasize right out the gates how important this is. Even if you don't think like, well, some of you may not even have sons, or you have sons that like you may not think, oh, my kids don't have ADHD. This topic is so incredibly important because it's a massive topic in society right now. And as we're going to get into, about half the population has what's been referred to as hunter's brain, meaning their brains are more active. They need more stimulus. And that's not
Well,
a bad thing. It's an awesome thing. It just manifests differently. So we don't always see it the same. You think, oh, it's just a tiny percentage, have those active brains. That's not the reality, right? The reality is that half the population has that kind of really active brain and needs that much stimuli.
so you're talking about hunter's brain, but for some people they call that ADD or
Yep.
ADHD.
Yep.
But that it's actually a lot more common than we realize because
And I would say, go
you're
ahead.
gone. You're gone
I'm
now.
out. Now you talk.
Um, it's more, and we figured this out because we have a child that has ADD, which actually ADD is kind of the older term that was used. I think the more updated and accurate term now is ADHD. Well, that is according to psychologist Dr. Sachs. That's the case. And so we have a child that was diagnosed with this. And what the doctor told us, who is a brain specialist as well, is that another thing it's called, another term used for it, is hunter's brain. And it's simply, if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, or ancient tribes and people, it's basically this idea that some people were the gatherers and some people were the hunters, and they had kind of different types of brains to help them with this. This is getting just in case you're wondering, we're obviously not at our house in Georgia. We just have the backdrop of that. We are in Lithuania.
And it's awesome.
But we have this background that's
Glitching in and out.
annoying.
So we'll be like, this reminds you of Star Wars. Remember those? Always they had the little glitchy videos, like Obi-Wan.
Yes. It's a message
Yes.
from the future or the past.
Well,
Anyway, so hunter's brain actually affects about, not affects it. I don't even think that's the right term.
no,
It's just that's how it is. There's about half of the population that have hunter's brain. Now, obviously, there's varying degrees of that. So some show that more and demonstrate that more. And it also plays out in different ways. So for our child who has ADD, because a lot of times it's associated with fidgety, being fidgety, not being able to pay attention, things like that.
Which is totally normal. That is normal and healthy for most kids, especially little boys. And I guess I want to really emphasize that and get into that. Yeah.
We're going to get into that. But for our daughter who has ADD or ADHD, for her, she actually, when she does have a hard time focusing on things, especially if she's not interested in it, which we're going to talk about. But the way it manifests for her is she actually gets very quiet and will often fall asleep. And so instead of like not being able to hold still, she doesn't look like that. When her ADD doesn't manifest like that,
she just checks out.
She just mentally checks out, and you kind of see her just glaze over, and then she'll be gone, and then she'll fall asleep.
Like there's that's talking, ADD. There's tons going on, and she's out cold.
That's how her ADD manifests.
And I even, we're going to use those terms because they're common terms, but right. I hate even using them. In fact, labels. I don't want to refer to it anymore as ADD or ADHD, because the last D on both of those is disorder. And I want to boldly say here that the very, very few who have an actual disorder is so rare, unbelievably rare. And unfortunately, in the US, we are medicating anyone who has just hunter's brain activity, and it's and labeling them and saying it's a disorder when it's not. It's just it's just a different brain activity.
Right. So that's one of the things. The problem with it, by labeling it a disorder, it's like dis-ease. It's as though there's something wrong, something's off, something's not normal, when that's not the case. I'm trying to get back in
And
here.
some of you may be saying, well, like, no, something is off. My son or my daughter won't just sit still and listen. That's because they're a kid. I mean, well, okay, not even a kid. Like, how many adults wouldn't sit still and listen, especially if something's boring or uninteresting, or they have hunter's brain? We just were not hardwired or created to learn like that. This
Well,
sit
some
still,
people,
be quiet,
yeah.
and learn is it's for a certain group of type of learner.
So there's a couple things there. One of them, which he talks about in this book, Boys Adrift. Can we even show the book in the stupid thing? Yeah, no. Boys Adrift. One of the things he talks about is that when we label something, say, as like a disorder or some sort of problem, psychological problem, or whatever it is,
There you go.
then it removes responsibility. And we may not think of it as that, as that's what's happening, but that is what's happening. It takes responsibility off of us and our parenting skills, or off the child and their responsibility for growth and development and improvement. And it puts it on
Nobody.
Well, maybe it puts it on the doctor, or maybe it puts it on the disorder, or maybe it puts it on whatever. And so it's then the doctor's responsibility or the medication's responsibility to solve the problem, to fix the problem, instead of taking the responsibility back and saying, what can I do to be a better parent? Because, you know, we might think, oh, well, parenting has nothing to do with it. Yeah, it does. Everything affects everything. So your parenting is affecting your child's ADD behavior.
100%.
The schooling, that's the other big major issue he points out. Part of the problem with all of these things that are going on with disorders and ADD is the schooling system. The schooling system is not designed to facilitate, well, it doesn't have the best interest of specifically major, you know, obviously he's talking about boys in this book, especially boys, doesn't have their best interests at heart, meaning it's not designed for their learning styles. So often boys are getting, well, especially boys are getting overdiagnosed. Well, they're being diagnosed more than girls because they have different learning styles and they have different modes of, like, they're different drives. Things drive them differently than they do girls. And the system in schooling is mostly geared towards the way women and females learn. And so that's a disadvantage that's leading to more medication. When really there's not a problem. The problem is the school. If there is a problem, it's the school system, right? So you have all these factors coming into play here, and the result is we're labeling something as a disorder that's actually perfectly normal. It's not abnormal for them to not be able to focus on something that doesn't interest them. That's right. Like actually human. And especially for the hunter-gatherer brain, like that, they're meant to be able to do that. Because like our doctor that we spoke to that explained it, that part of the population learned how to hunt, and they had to learn how to pay attention to multiple things at the same time. And that's essentially what they're doing. They're changing their focus because that's how you go hunting. You're looking for different things. You're paying attention to all the things in the environment. And so
now I can hear somebody saying right now, but like, we don't need hunters anymore. Like, we have a deli.
Come into the,
and so
we have a
so at that point,
Walmart.
yeah, we have, like, you can go to the butcher. We can't take it that literally. We desperately need in society all types of people with all types of brains.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the different learning abilities and different functions, different learning styles, different thinking styles that makes the world wonderful. That's how people come up with with ideas and creations that you and I would never think of because our brains just didn't operate like that. So we need this in society, and the half of us that have these really active brains that want to latch onto all the stimuli, like we need that. It's a good thing. It's a wonderful, healthy thing. So there's nothing wrong with that. Now, it can get a little exacerbated with nutrition. That's a big one. So if somebody comes to me and is like, I'm struggling with this, the very first thing I'm going to do with behavior, it's like, you need to change your food.
Well, and this goes back to the idea of the responsibility part of it. When your child is labeled with a disorder, well, now suddenly, oh, it's about this label that they have. And the answer comes from the doctor, the expert, and the medication. That's the answer, which we're going to discuss how actually potentially harmful that is. But when you own this thing, when you say, oh, well, my child is struggling in these areas, my child isn't, they need to be able to do this, or they're not doing that. And then you start to look at other things. Well, okay, what's playing into this? Maybe it's the food. Maybe it's the sleep. Maybe it's my parenting style. Maybe it's, one story he told, which I thought was very powerful.
All three of those, for
you're
sure.
right. It's probably a mixture of all of those. But one of the stories he told that was very powerful was of this young child who at a young age, a young child at a young age,
who was young.
Exactly. Scoot forward here. I feel like
you're talking. Go for it.
He was diagnosed actually by his mother, so it wasn't actually by a doctor, with ADD. And she went to the doctor, Dr. Leonard Sachs, and asked him to prescribe medication for him. And he said, this was back earlier in my practice. I wasn't as confident about my beliefs as I am now. And so she was very insistent. And so I said, okay, because her approach was, well, let's just try it and see if it helps.
Ugh.
And so
can I just rant for a minute? Don't ever just try it with drugs.
Just say no.
I can't understand that. Like, and I think it falls back to this societal victimism where, that's very common now. We want the easy answer.
We want
it's like, well, instead of me, taking the effort and ownership and really saying, you know what, I'm going to level up here on every aspect: food, sleep, my parenting skills, my strategies. I'm going all in to have this healthy child be their best self. I'm going all in. We just want to take this cop out, like, well, let's just try it. Let's put a chemical in this precious little child.
Because here's the thing.
No way.
Like, I can understand where parents are coming from because they want an answer. They want to help their child. In the book, he lays out her side of the story, which is, I don't want my son to do bad in school. I don't want him to suffer. I want him to have a love of learning. I want all of these things. Like, her intentions were good. And so we think, I've tried everything else I can think of right now. I've reached the end of my skills. I'm going to try the medication because if it helps, then, that's a good thing. We think that's a good thing. Now he goes in and explains why it's not a good thing because of the nucleus accumbens or whatever. And we're going to talk about that. But, her intentions were good. We know that. As parents, we're not trying to drug our children, right? Or most of the time. We have their best intention at heart. And we think, if this will help, then let's do it. And so that was her intention. And so they put him on the drugs. I don't remember. It was like Ritalin, maybe something like that. And it worked at first, but then it wasn't working. And so then they went to another doctor and he said, let's up the dose.
Ugh.
So they upped the dose, and then the kid was depressed. And then so they put him on Prozac because he was depressed. And now he's 9. This is by the time he's 9. This poor kid is depressed on Prozac. And so
he started medication, and then he's got an increased dose. and then another medication to take care of the symptoms of the first medication, and he's just a healthy, normal 9-year-old boy.
Yes.
That's so jacked.
So then what happens, he kind of fast forwards in time where he then ends up meeting with this kid again later. Now he's a teenager. Sounded maybe he was a preteen. And he mentioned that he went in for the interview with the kid and he noticed on his charts that it said medications he was taking, none. So he's like, oh, okay, that's interesting, because he knew he'd been taking a lot. And he goes in and he talks to this kid, and this kid is just like, I think he was a teenager, because he said he was like muscular and tan, and then he had this very interesting conversation with him about the history of Crete and all of these things. And this kid was like very, like, he was doing great. He could just tell that he was doing great. And so he went out and he talked to the mom. He's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. What happened? Oh, let me guess. You took him off the medication. And she's like, no, we tried to take him off the medication and it was a train wreck. It didn't work. She said, what we did is we switched schools. And what had happened specifically in his case is he had been going to a co-ed school, boys and girls, which, you know, that's normal. And they switched him to an all boys school. And they said, here's what happened. He started to show these problems of ADD when he was young, and they had put him in the gifted and talented class. And then he started to take classes that he was interested in, which were art and creative writing. And most of the kids in the class were girls. And then he started to get made fun of by the boys because he was in the girls' classes. And so he started to hate school and not be able to focus and pay attention. Like, all of these things are going on. All of these factors are happening. But yet the teacher says, or the mom says, usually the teacher is actually the one that ends up suggesting drugs for ADD. This is something he mentions. Most of the time it's initiated by a teacher, but they say, oh, he's struggling. He's not doing well. He can't focus. Let's medicate him, right? When really it was all of these other factors that were going on. It was all of these things. He was in a different class. He was taking classes with girls that made him feel, made him get made fun of by the boys. And so when they removed all of that, and then this is what she said, we removed it all. We put him in
An all boys school.
All boys school. I was thinking there was a word for an all boys school. There's not. Co-ed is the girls and boys. They put him in an all boys school. And suddenly now he's not made fun of because he's taking the classes he wants like he did before, but now it's with all boys. So nobody's making fun of him.
And you can't have an all boys school that tries to teach in an all girl method.
Exactly.
Right? So they know how to work with boys. And so boys obviously thrive because they're learning how to learn and thriving in their environment, how they function.
Exactly.
And so in this case, it was a completely social problem.
Right. Well, and then
they were medicating this poor kid because of the social issues. Man, this stuff drives me crazy.
So then they added this, that because his art teacher was also the lacrosse teacher, he started getting into lacrosse, and turns out he's really good at that. So then, and she's like, a few months after moving him to this new school, they were able to drop all the medication. And so that's now, now she's meeting with Dr. Sachs and telling him the story. That's what happened. They were able to switch the environment, the circumstances. They took ownership. I mean, kudos to that mom, because she literally kept looking for the answers, right? She saw, okay, I wanted the medication. I thought that would solve the problem. Then kept looking for more solutions because it wasn't solving the problem, and finally switched him to a different school. And that's what solved the problem. And then they were able to get off the medication. And so back to this whole idea of everything affects everything. Like, it's more than just the one thing. And it's not just the medication that's going to solve the problem. Besides the fact that, like we mentioned, half the population has the hunter's brain. Okay, this thing. Get with me here. All right. So anyways.
So I guess I want to reemphasize there. It's medication is extremely rarely is it the answer. It's other strategies, it's other actions, it's trying other things. And it's a sad story with it. It was a good ending, but like that poor kid should never have been drugged. And again, it's an American thing. He points out that we just turn to drugs for everything. I just saw just today now, because obesity is such a problem among children, doctors are now, and this is like hit big news channels, doctors are now recommending surgery and medication for obese children. And they're saying, yeah, it's no longer, you shouldn't wait anymore. You should medicate your obese kids and have them get surgeries. And I was like, I can't even believe that anyone would suggest that. It's insane. And it's just another way of avoiding like accountability and ownership of the fact that you should change your lifestyle.
Right.
And change your parenting.
Right.
Oh, man.
And so what I want to actually emphasize, because it's not just that we're anti-medication or that Dr. Sachs is anti-medication, but what he is seeing in the research, one of the reasons why actually doing the medication route is a bad idea is because of the long-term effects that it's having. One of which is reducing motivation in the child, and especially as they become older, as they get into their teens and then eventually their adulthood, taking this medication actually reduces their motivation. And the reason why is because there's this part of our brain that's called, I don't know if I'm saying it exactly right, it's called like the nucleus accumbens. And it is the motivational center for human beings. And I think also rats too, other animals, but it is what turns like drive into action. So if we have some sort of, say we're hunger, what turns hunger into action, meaning you go out and hunt or you get food or whatever, is the nucleus accumbens. Well, in people with hunter's brain or ADD, the nucleus accumbens is actually larger than average.
Because it needs to be. That's a good thing.
Well, especially if you go back to the hunter-gatherers.
Well, right? Even now, we need half the society with a larger nucleus accumbens, right, like to get things done. So highly motivated children and people are often labeled as ADHD, which is completely wrong. They're just highly motivated, and the drugs they're giving them are quite literally minimizing or destroying their motivation.
They're actually shrinking the nucleus accumbens,
which is the last thing you want to do, is demotivate people.
Right. And so a lot of these children who end up taking these drugs, it is calming them down. They're able to focus. They're getting better grades. Partly that's because their motivational center is being shrunk. They're shrinking it. And so then the other problem is that now they are no longer motivated and driven. Part of the reason ADD is a problem is they're so motivated and driven to do so many different things. That's why it's a problem. You can't use your hands. Apparently, when you use your hands, you disappear.
These are the kids that if we let them be and facilitate growth and learning, they're going to be inventors and creators and entrepreneurs and innovators and hustlers. They're going to make the world a better place. But instead, we're drugging them and telling them to conform. Like we have to, like, oh man, we're like trying to force them to fit into this mold that just doesn't work for them at all. Man, so I get so fired up about this.
So
yeah, fantastic, love that. So Katie said in the comments here, I was on the medication. It had a big benefit in the moment, but then the long run major problems, sleepless, addiction, et cetera. Didn't find out how I really learned until in 30s. Exactly. It's another example of that. And there's so many of those examples. So we really, I don't know, overall.
Well, I was gonna expound on another story too, because he talked about this other kid who, again, he was a very highly motivated 5-year-old, very active, doing lots of things, into everything, but a happy kid, he loved doing things and learning things, and goes through this whole scenario of he goes to school, of course, he's in kindergarten, and the teacher's complaining because he can't sit still and pay attention. And then at first the mom, and the teacher's like, oh, he needs to go see a psychiatrist or, get this checked out, to get a diagnosis. And at first she's talking to him and the mom's like, well, I thought this wouldn't be a problem because kindergarten is supposed to be about playing games and things like that. And as he emphasizes in his book a lot, like, well, that was like 30 years ago, what it was like. Kindergarten's not like that anymore. Now it's more like first grade. You're supposed to sit down and read and write and do all these things.
But the brain's not ready for that.
Which, especially for boys, the brain's not ready for that in kindergarten. And so the mom's like, well, isn't that a problem with the school then, not with my son? And he says, exactly, that is the case. And so he gives her 3 options. You know, you can do nothing and just work harder on trying to get your son to sit still. You can take him out and hold him back a year. But won't they think he's a failure? How am I going to explain this to my in-laws, you know? Or you can give him the drugs. And so she opted to give him the drugs because, you know, that's, you know, parents want their kids to succeed. They want them to not look like failures. They want them to get ahead. Well, fast forward, she said she would try to not give him the drugs during certain times, like the summertime, or at first she tried it on the weekends, and immediately his behavior just worsened. So as soon as he stopped taking the medication, he was like a different person. And she said he would act in more aggressive ways that she hadn't seen before. And so then she decided to just give him the medication every single day. But then she tried taking him off for the summers. And she said, and the thing that happened is he started to be lazy. He used to be the kid that was always wanting to do things, always wanting to, you know, if grandpa wanted to go fishing or he wants to go do this thing, he always wanted to do it. She's like, now all he wants to do is nothing except video games. And so he explains, you know, he tells the story. That one really didn't have a happy ending. That was just like the story of what happened. But no, she was asking. He didn't really give a conclusion, but she was asking, what do I do? Like, how do I solve this problem? And then that's when he goes into this whole explanation of obviously how in America we are more prone to medicate for these problems, even more than any other country, pretty much. By far. And what the result it's having is demotivation, because, you know, his book is the 5 factors driving the growing epidemic of unmotivated boys. This is one of them. We're drugging them, and the drugs, and he lists like 5 or 7 of them, Ritalin, Adderall, you know, all these different ones, are essentially shrinking the motivational center of the brain so that as they grow older, think about this, these are developmental ages and stages. And so the brain is not developing fully so that motivational center is smaller than it would be. And so
I wish we could visually see this.
Yeah.
Where you see the formation of the brain happening, because the brain, if you study childhood development and how the brain is changing constantly through all those ages, and if we could watch like a time lapse video of the brain transforming over time, and especially if someone that's got a very active, like Hunter's brain that we're talking about, right? You get this little boy who has a very active mind. If we could do a time lapse of that and see the process, like even in just a few months' time, it changes massively. And all of a sudden, sometimes it'll just click and the kid's behavior will just get better. Sometimes it's a food thing like we talked about. Sometimes it's a sleep thing. Sometimes it's an interest thing. Sometimes it's some other kind of stimulant. But then if we could compare it to a time lapse where they start introducing drugs into this little developing brain and all these changes are going on, and all of a sudden this foreign substance comes in there and starts wrecking things that then mess up maybe permanently sometimes.
Well, no, okay, that's actually what I was going to say, because as he points out, it is reversible.
Awesome.
And so that's the good news. He actually shared that story of the other kid later to show, hey, no, this is actually reversible. You can change this.
That's great.
You change the environment, you change the circumstances, you change the stimulant, meaning, you know, the outside stimulants. And then now the brain and the child is happy, they're focused, they're productive, but naturally. And so you can get rid of the medication, and all of that can change. So that's the good answer.
Yeah. So I think overall, the main thing I want to share with all of us tonight, today, this morning, wherever you are in the world, it's nighttime for us over here. The main thing I want to share and emphasize is that if half the population has hunter's brain, we must do things differently and allow those of us with that kind of learning style to have, we got to facilitate that. We got to give them opportunities and not expect them to conform to things that don't work for them. And so again, this is why we have this responsibility. And let's say you have 4 or 5 or 6 kids, whatever. Let's say you have 4 kids. The likelihood is half of your kids have a hunter's brain, and they're going to learn differently, statistically, right?
Well,
and
even
you
though it may
have
not
to do things differently for them.
even though it may not show up in the same ways, because
Right.
we have a couple kids, again, our daughter has it, our son probably has it, but it shows up differently. It manifests in different ways. So it's not, it doesn't always look exactly the same.
I would say at
even
least half our children have it, and but they use different vehicles,
right, exactly,
to meet their needs. And you and I, as parents and as teachers and educators, we all are, we have to learn how to facilitate those things and notice those things. And for years, when I learned this stuff years ago, I was like, man, I can't just keep expecting the same results. And so I started paying really close attention. And when I'm around my kids or with other youth or kids, and I notice they're drawn to something, they want to do something, it's intriguing to them, it's interesting to them, it's motivating to them, they have curiosity. And the usual default response is no, you can't do that, don't do that, don't behave. And we're trying to make them behave an age that they're not, or in this certain way that just doesn't work for them. So for years now, I've been really proactively trying to say, what is it about this that's interesting to this child? What would make it cool for them? How can I say yes? How can I say yes to this? So if a child wants to do something, I direct it, I guide it, I channel it to something else where they can do the thing or something similar in a way that's great. So if a kid wants to be super physical, great. Get them in wrestling or jujitsu or martial arts or boxing or whatever, like get them into something like that. If they want to be crazy and do crazy things, get them into skiing or snowboarding or whatever, and let them go fast as they want to go. Get them into challenges. If they just need to be stimulated all the time, if they want to break things, if they just like, I want to break stuff, then facilitate a way for them to build things or get a hold of things that they can break. Right? They want to take things apart. Fantastic. Find a thrift store and let them take things apart. Like facilitate that childlike, beautiful curiosity that doesn't always fit into society, but there's nothing wrong with the child.
Well, it's interesting because Jordan Peterson always talks about how interest cannot be coerced or forced. You cannot force yourself or anyone else, someone else, to be interested in something they're not. Interest just is something that occurs in us. And it's actually a very fascinating phenomenon that we don't fully understand. Like, why is it that you're interested in something? And so I think what you're talking about here is the way to solve this problem of ADHD, if it's a problem, which it's not, but the way to facilitate it and nurture it and direct it is by following those interests. Because then it's amazing, like a child who can't focus in school or can't focus on the task you've given them, they have no problem focusing on something that truly interests them. They can spend hours, and I've seen it, doing the thing that they love to do, right? So it's not that they don't have the ability to focus, it's that they like to focus on the things that interest them. So we have to pay attention to those interests and then direct their learning in that way. So
powerful. So we're gonna keep today's training short, but again, a major emphasis here. And I know that several of you in this group with us, I know personally that you have a child or two or three or four that are super, like it manifests as super hyperactive, somewhat quote troublesome, right? Or they kind of fight back. They'll be rebellious. They just kind of wreak havoc on things. But that's because their brains are super active, and you don't want to
Very
destroy
motivated.
that. They're super, super motivated people. It's almost like, I don't know, earlier today I was talking with somebody, and we were talking about dogs and thinking about this. Like certain kind of dogs would just kind of lay around. They're just super chill. And other
Like a
dogs,
mastiff.
like a big old English mastiff, they'll just like lay around by the fireplace. It's really awesome. But then you get a sheepdog, right? Or a cattle dog. Those things, or a husky. We went and rode huskies in Norway.
You rode them?
We didn't ride them. We did dog sleds, right? So the sled dogs, the husky sled dogs, they were yiping and barking and biting and howling like they wanted to run. And every time you touch the brake, they were so bothered. Like they were just bent out of shape. They're like, let us go. Like they're bred to want to run and pull that sled literally as fast as they can. And they'll run for miles and miles and miles. They'll do an 8-hour day and just run because they want to run. Now, if you get that dog and you put it in an apartment and you never take it for a walk, it will destroy your apartment. It'll just tear everything to shreds, right? Because it's made to work and run and do things. Some of our children are like that. Some of us are like that. We are made to do things. Like if you put me in a cubicle and say, hey, I need you to work on some spreadsheets today,
For 8 hours.
I would go crazy. I would become very, very troublesome.
We'd have
in
to
that.
medicate you.
Yeah, I'd be medicated and I would be troublesome in that building. I'm not built that way. I'm not made for that. And yet it's happening all the time in society. We're putting people with a different learning style, different drives, different motivations, different kinds of brains. We're trying to force them into something that doesn't work.
And when it doesn't work, then the answer has become to medicate.
We think something's wrong with them. It's like, it's not. You can't, I don't know. I like the metaphor there with the dog. You can't take a cattle dog and make it a lap dog. It won't work. They're just hardwired to work and run and bite. Like that's their job. That's what they're bred for. So we have to remember that. And so with our kids, you guys look at their food, look at their sleep, look at your parenting styles, look at their learning styles, look at the stimulus, look at their curiosity, look at what drives them,
Their interests.
look at their interests, and feed all of those things. Do not, please, and share this idea with everyone you can know. We've got to stop this medicating problem in the United States where we just turn to some drug and we think something's wrong. We call it a disorder. It's not. It's just it's a normal, good thing. And we've got to switch that around and make that happen. Okay, sorry guys. I know a few of you are just joining us here, and we're just wrapping up. I don't know if there was a time schedule thing or whatever we're just missing, but
And our computer is about to die.
and we don't have any
there's
extension
no-
cord. We're in Lithuania, and there's
There's
no
no
extension
plug.
cord. There's no plug. And I've been doing some coaching today, and so the computer's gonna die. So we're gonna wrap up this training. But go back, watch the recording. This topic is so unbelievably important. And statistically, half of your children have hunter's brain, right? Which some people would label as ADHD or disorder. That's just
Or
not
ADHD,
the case.
ADD, they're equivalent.
Yeah, not the case. And so you and I take ownership and responsibility for this, to be more proactive, to look for ways to help our children thrive no matter what their learning style is. Now, one last thought is like, don't be resentful to that child or frustrated because it seems like more work. Some of your kids, and I know this because we talked, some of your kids seem so unbelievably easy to raise. We have a daughter like that. Whatever we ask, she does. Whatever we don't ask, she still does. She's organized, neat and clean, just amazing. So easy. I'm quoting here, but then I go off.
Don't use
screen.
your hand.
So, quote, easy to raise. And then the others with really the hunter's brain, who we need, they seem, quote, harder to raise because they require, it seems like they require more work. My invitation is not to see it like that. Just see it as different, right? We have to be more proactive and look for different ways to engage them as they thrive. You guys with me on this? I think this is huge. I could just shout this from the rooftops. I could, if I had a message to all parents in the US, this is one of the things that I would address. Like it's not a disorder. It's not a problem. These are healthy kids. The system's broken. The parenting strategies are not working, but it's not the kid. And if anything, it's the diet, the American diet, and poor sleep patterns. So the poor little body and brain is just not working right because it's getting all these chemicals and this junk and poor sleep. But if a child is eating good healthy food, like no chemicals, no processed crap, and getting good sleep, and be able to just be curious and move and run and learn, oh man, they're going to thrive. And they're going to be unstoppable, which is exactly how we want our kids to be. So don't slip into
Even
the
though that
temptation.
often feels like
Oh man, it feels exhausting.
problem.
Right? You're like, they can
you are
outrun
unstoppable.
us. Yeah, you're unstoppable. You're an unstoppable kid, and I need you to stop because I'm exhausted here. But we can pick it up, right? We can be better than that. And it actually keeps us younger. It keeps us alive because we have to try to keep up with those kids. So those kids aren't a curse; they're a blessing. That kid that's just making you're trying to pull your hair out, that's the kid that's keeping you going, right? It's a blessing. So love you guys. Remember this. If you missed part of it, go back and listen to the first part of the stories and the background. And this chapter in the book is just absolutely phenomenal. And it's a big issue that needs to be addressed. And we need to be a part of this conversation, and we need to be proactive in talking about with others and absolutely stopping this movement to more drugs and more medications that's happening in the US. It's and doctors have become drug dealers in the US, and it is an absolute tragedy. And it's become slowly over the years become more and more acceptable to drug kids. And that has got to stop. And we've got to raise our voices and be a part of that movement to stop it. Okay. Love you guys. Do the best.
One thing Amy's asking what the topic of the next call will be. We're going to keep going through this book, Boys Adrift, just because I feel like
It's okay.
I feel like I really want to dive into these topics. And so we're doing boys now. I think we'll actually do girls next.
Yep.
So there's just a couple more chapters. I think perhaps if we can, we'll combine them. It's going to be talking about, he calls it endocrine disruptors, which actually ties into what Greg was talking about with the food. There's all these chemicals and stuff in our environment. This is actually lowering testosterone and all these other things. So we're going to discuss that. And then his last chapter, he calls the Revenge of the Forsaken Gods, which is going to be very fascinating, I think, just about the whole shift in society with lots of different things, religion, masculinity, those types of things.
And all these topics are so relevant for all of us, you guys. This isn't just specifically about, little boys.
And it's not just specifically if you have boys, it's a societal problem. All of us know men or will marry men or will have sons. Like, it touches us all in some way. And so that's why it's important to understand what's going on and to see how we can contribute to the solution. So that's what we will be talking about next time. And then we will get his book about girls on the edge, I think it's called.
Okay, guys, love you. Go out and love on your kids. And for those of you who have the children or you yourselves or spouses with the hunter's brain, lean into it. Lean into it.
Lean into the camera here and find strategies that work for you guys and for your kids. Okay, love you. Reach upward.